What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for God of War Ragnarok. Specifically, its PC release, which happened not all that long ago on September 19th, and after playing and enjoying the first title when it came to PC on its own, I knew I eventually wanted to get around to checking out this one. With that in mind, a few things to note. For starters, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a video linked below that will go over everything I cover, and then my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. Though, as always with these games that have been out a while, that's usually a pretty tame proposition overall. Now, one other thing I do want to mention here is that there's going to be some minor spoilers in this video. We're not going to go super in-depth to like every story beat or anything. But as this is a sequel, we're definitely going to be spoiling the first title, because this is a direct continuation, and there's also a fair few things that are really hard to talk about without spoiling something, so with that in mind, you've been warned. With that said, let's get into it. So, God of War Ragnarok is a combat-focused action-adventure follow-up to, of course, 2018's God of War, a reimagining of the series after its initial trilogy. And what Ragnarok attempts to be in relation to the 2018 title is bigger and better. And for the most part, I would say it succeeds at that, but there are certainly some things to know. For starters, and probably the main thing I want to get across with this particular video, is that Ragnarok is honestly a bit bloated and has some serious pacing issues with a lot of the sections of the game, down to things like how enemies scale in terms of side content relative to you at any given point in the story, even on regular old normal difficulty, and then moments where the actual story drags on long past what is necessary, seemingly for the sake of expanding upon characters that get little screen time or relevancy to the plot anyway, which contributes to that overall feeling of bloat that I got with this one. But luckily, the story itself, outside of those sections, is still really good, at least for me. Exploration and moving through the world is mostly as fun as the first game as well, outside of one area, and then they even mix up combat a little bit to make that more interesting at the same time. With what is, in my opinion, mixed success. Parts of that I enjoyed, parts of it I did not. Moving on though, let's talk specifics. Starting with the technical state of this one, as this is effectively a port to PC. What does that look like? How's it working for people? So right away, the game does require a PlayStation Network account, even if you're on Steam, which they make very clear right next to the buy button for this game on the store page. So it's not anything that's hidden or a last-minute addition like we saw previously with Ghost of Tsushima, but honestly, still a bit of an annoyance with a single-player title to be sure, especially since, let's be honest, they're purely after your data on that one, which was made very clear by their recent edition of that Horizon Zero Dawn remaster that changed next to nothing on a recent game, and that's coming to Steam and also requiring a PSN for a single-player title, but they also removed the older version of the game where that wasn't a requirement, so it's very clear to me at least that they're really pushing that on people, and it's very annoying for these single-player titles. And completely ignoring that, it also seems to be triggering people's firewalls in places here and there, though once you've logged into that at least once, it does seem to let you play offline afterwards, which is important to note for things like the Steam Deck in particular, which this game is verified on, but we'll get to that. Though that's hardly the only thing that bears mentioning in this section, so we have things like keyboard and mouse controls to talk about as well. Kinda hit or miss here for a lot of stuff. It's fully rebindable. Other things they seem to be weirdly picky about, like the sprint toggle for instance, which is mostly just a minor annoyance, but even then we still have more serious technical issues as well. Now personally, the only thing I experienced was annoying, but not that bad in the grand scheme of things, which was primarily a lot of just freezing every so often. The game would freeze for like 5 to 10 seconds, which might have something to do with shader compilation, I believe. And then I also ran into a problem that seemed to have been fixed by a patch relatively recently, a couple of days ago from the time of this video, where I went to play a certain section of the game and it kept consistently crashing, so anytime something like that happens, it's usually wise to verify the installation on Steam, make sure you have all the files for the game, etc. And in doing that, I had apparently lost a few files over the course of playing the game, which I think had something to do with a patch, given that their most recent patch notes specifically mention that exact series of crashes, which is certainly annoying. So when it comes to the technical side of things, I would say God of War Ragnarok on PC is not terrible, it's not unplayable or anything, but it certainly has more than a couple of different problems to be aware of, and I've certainly seen better ports overall, which was especially odd to me specifically because they seem to have went through a lot of trouble to get this game running really well on the Steam Deck and everything, but then let these other side issues continue to be a nuisance. But that's enough of that. Let's finally move on a little bit and talk about difficulty and New Game Plus. So, difficulty-wise, now for the most part you have everything between Give Me Story and Give Me God of War. From testing all of these, the primary thing that I can tell changes, because they don't exactly give you a comprehensive rundown, seems to be the damage you take. Both the damage you deal and the health of enemies doesn't really seem to change much, if at all from what I could tell, but as difficulty goes up, you become much squishier, which means learning how to avoid taking all sorts of damage becomes especially important. Now, everything between Give Me Story and Give Me No Mercy difficulties can be freely swapped between. The game seems to expect you to do this to some degree, as there really isn't any friction on that front in any way. Now the catch here is Give Me God of War difficulty and New Game Plus. So on this difficulty, you have to start a new game at that difficulty in order to experience it. Unlike the 2018 version, Give Me God of War here doesn't actually have any special benefits or any extra rewards for clearing it. Now there is, however, a general point to doing New Game Plus, which is that you get access to a whole bunch of different cosmetic armors that are only available in New Game Plus, and Give Me No Mercy and Give Me God of War actually change some of the boss fights in terms of movesets and stuff, but again, you don't need to do the highest difficulty to experience that either, which kind of makes me wonder why they bothered to put it in it at all. You could have just stopped at No Mercy, I guess, and taken this one away, as I'm genuinely curious what the thought process here was in making these changes, because to me at least, they don't seem to make much sense. But let's move on, talk about the story setup and my thoughts on it. Again, we're not going full spoilers here, but there absolutely will be some, so do keep that in mind. Maybe consider skipping this altogether if you prefer, but let's get into it. The story catches up with Kratos and Atreus following the ending of the first game that saw them killing Freya's son, Baldur, which kicks off Fimbulwinter, which you've been just trying to survive in, which is the prelude to Ragnarok, the big end-of-the-world war that is going to happen according to prophecy. Also, at the end of the last game, we find out that Atreus is likely meant to be Loki, and he's been both coming of age and also searching for answers about who he is and what he's supposed to be doing at the same time. This ultimately leads to a confrontation with Odin and Thor right at the beginning of the game, which sets events into motion to tell us a grand narrative about both Norse mythology, of course, but also more interesting facets of simply being a parent. Now, as a father myself, this spoke volumes to me, but otherwise may not be of great interest to you personally. But speaking for myself at least, this story had a lot of themes of getting to grips with your children leaving the nest, so to speak, and giving them the tools they need to survive without you. And the game likes to play around with both the perspective of that situation from Kratos himself, but also Atreus, and how both of them feel about that, and it's really well done. For me at least, the best part of the game, truth be told. And while I can't claim to have had to fight off any Norse gods in protection of my son, I will say that my son just recently started school properly, and he's out of the house a lot now, doing things in a supervised environment, sure, but without his parents around for the first time. So, I don't know, a lot of those themes really struck a chord with me personally, which is, in large part, kind of why I enjoyed the first game so much as well, because of what it did narratively with those things. But as a combat-focused action adventure, I could also see you not caring about that part at all. Now, the problem with everything I just mentioned, though, is that I don't think this story is paced particularly well, especially in terms of the actual gameplay and content you'll be approaching as well, but basically there are several sections of this game which are very long and contribute very little to the experience. Now, unfortunately for Atreus, they often tend to be his sections of the game, where they will spend hours setting up Atreus' relationship with a given character, only for that to end up barely being a footnote in the overall story, which made me feel like they could have cut the time that little set piece took in half, and it would not have mattered to the overall content here. So while the main story winds up taking about 30 hours to go through, I would say if you removed some of the bloat that it felt like was there, you probably could have cut that down by 10. And in large part because of that, there were several portions of this game where I was just thinking to myself, like, I got the story beat you're trying to put through here, like, we can move on, which unfortunately it usually does not do. And then that's not helped along by the fact that the very sort of final section of the game feels a little, not exactly sudden because of how much build-up there was to it, but short, I guess, would be the word. You spend all this time building up to the big climactic event, only for things to progress very, very quickly when you get there. So the pacing of this one just feels all wrong. But from there, let's talk progression systems. So progression is, I would say, relatively simple, but overall still pretty interesting. Now, one thing I was curious about, and I'm always curious about sequels and stuff and how they handle this when they're direct continuations, is we already went through one game where we got quite powerful. So what's going on and why have we lost all of this progression this time around? Well, the explanation here is simply Fimbulwinter, this big cataclysmic winter that is the prelude to Ragnarok, apparently takes quite a toll on anything magical in nature, so things like your powers, etc. have atrophied, which, as narrative framings go, fair enough. But progression is, at the same time, a mirror of the first game while adding just a few extra things here and there. So in many ways, it's still just equipment and weapon upgrades, so there are all sorts of armor sets. Each of them has a power level associated with them. You can upgrade that via resources as you go. Actual armor pieces can have things like set bonuses and whatnot. Later on, you get an amulet that you can slot enchantments into it, which can have multiple set bonuses. They added an extra weapon that you'll get to use this time, a spear, which has its own move set and things and feels different as you learn your runic attacks for it. Each of your 3 weapons has runic attacks that you'll find and upgrade as well. You can also get a relic this time around, which is like a quick temporary buff or move that you can activate on occasion. And there's stuff like your shield, which in the 2018 version was just sort of a basic shield, has now been divvied up into several different types of shield, which each excel at an individual thing, which was not something I was a fan of personally. All of them, including the basic one that you eventually get back, somehow feels worse than the shield function in the 2018 version, but admittedly that's a preference thing. And then we have your skills. So as you kill things, complete quests, etc., you will be earning experience for you and anyone accompanying you, and you can spend that experience on upgrading various skills, which is going to unlock things like your combo attacks, different move sets for individual weapon types. You have a skill tree per weapon typically, and what's more, after you unlock those skills, you can then complete a challenge associated with them that the game calls a skill labor, and maxing that out will typically give you access to a mod for that skill that can alter some part of it. Maybe it deals a little less damage or inflicts a status effect much more efficiently, as an example. And as you upgrade and improve all of that stuff, it's going to contribute to your overall level. Now, in the base game, the max power level is up to 9, and then it goes a little bit farther in New Game Plus, but not much. Now, enemies will have a similar power level that is usually color-coded in relation to yours that will tell you how strong or weak they are in comparison to your power level. And then later on, there's some environmental stuff. For instance, the spear you eventually get allows you to traverse certain environmental obstacles as well, which clears the way for some progression in that sense. But largely, I would say progression is much the same as it was in the first game, with some small alterations to make it a little more interesting and not simply a complete one-for-one, though how you feel about any of those individual changes might very well differ. Again, personally, hated the shields, but I know a lot of people are going to appreciate the variety there. That brings me to the gameplay and world, however. So, gameplay and world-wise, this game is set up as a hub system, more or less. There are the 9 realms, and we're going to be operating out of a hub via Sindri's house, or the Blacksmith brothers from the first game as well make their appearance again here, of course, and their home, sort of in between realms, is what we're going to use as our hub area where we can both engage with things narratively, but also take a realm-spanning door to any of the other actual full-blown realms. Each of these realms typically is unlocked first as a story beat of some sort. You'll be progressing in a fairly linear fashion through it to chase some story objective. But once that initial deal is over, you're given more leeway to explore typically a whole other portion of that realm that wasn't included in that initial linear section at all. And this is where you're going to be doing things like engaging with side content, etc. Now, in between each major plot beat, you're not so subtly told, hey, you can go explore if you want. And this is where you can go track down things like, say, health and rage upgrades, resources for all your equipment upgrades, getting those levels up, simply exploring, of course, seeing what each of the 9 realms has to offer, completing some side quests, etc. Now, later on in the post-game, after the main story is complete, even more stuff opens up, so you can't do 100% of everything until that's cleared out, which is certainly of note. But along the way and through these side quests and interactions with different characters, you'll of course learn more about them, get their perspective on various story events, maybe just have them as a character fleshed out more while you also chase all of this side progression, and it's decently fun for what an action adventure is all about. Now, an issue I had even with this side content though is that it also tends to run into that pacing problem I mentioned, in that it's not uncommon for the side content that the game is actively telling you to go do if you want to do it, to be slightly over-leveled in comparison to you at the time you arrive at it. Which means some of this side exploration that it's urging you to go do becomes this weird dance of finding what is actually level appropriate for you at the time before continuing to the main story and gathering more levels as you go. And it feels, frankly, a little less than elegant to be able to go into an explorable area, have a pretty great time, and then randomly the big fight at the end of a given side quest has a boss that is well above your level for some random reason, when everything else in the area doesn't really compare to that. So again, there's just like some awkwardness there. And it's not insurmountable or even unheard of by any means. It's just awkward, and in combination with the pacing issues the actual story has, it's more noticeable than it probably would have been otherwise. Now, of all of these realms, including the new ones and returning ones, most of it's pretty much what you'd expect. Each realm kind of has its own thing going on. Fimbulwinter affected each of them individually differently, so that was kind of fun and neat to see. But one in particular was not fun, and I wanted to call it out very specifically, and that was Vanaheim, the original home of people like Freya and the other Vanir. Vanaheim sucks. It's a bunch of twisted jungle corridors that all kind of circle in and around each other. There's frankly not enough little fast travel points to allow you to effectively travel, so anytime you want to do any exploration here, it often involves trying to remember which of these randomly obscure jungle paths leads to where you need it to. And of everything going on with this game, just honestly navigating Vanaheim took longer than anything else, and I hated that place. If I ever see it again, it will frankly be too soon. But that brings us to the meat of what God of War is, which is naturally the combat system. Though, truth be told, again, if you've played the 2018 version, you kind of get the gist of this already. They made some small changes, but most of it works the same way. Which means if you enjoyed combat in that game, you'll probably enjoy it here as well, but if you didn't, you're likely in for a bad time. Now, personally, by far the thing I disliked the most change-wise was, as I mentioned, just what they did with the shields. None of them felt good to me anymore. I was constantly forgetting which shield did what, which led to no small amount of frustration on my part. And I mean, yeah, let's be honest, skill issue, sure. But going from the first game where that mechanic felt really good to me to this one where I just could not get a handle on it, obviously didn't feel great, which is why I didn't like it. But barring that, this time around we've got 3 weapons, the Leviathan Axe, the Chaos Blades, and later on a spear called the Dropnir. Each of these weapons has their own skill and move set that you can combo into each other, as you can switch between them freely, and you'll unlock that through the individual skill tree. Each of them also has a light and heavy version of a special attack called a runic attack that usually deals increased damage, can interrupt enemies at times, which can stop them from getting certain moves off, which I thought was especially important for me, at least, purely because in this version of God of War here, I had a much harder time parsing enemy telegraphs than the previous game as well. That is to say, like, when during a combo I could say dodge out of it or actually raise my shield to block, because the game felt inconsistent in that regard. But it's the kind of thing you get more of a feel for as you play, but was notably different than the original. Now, one thing that I found unexpectedly really fun was the Dropnir spear. So this new weapon that you get as part of the main story here allows you to basically throw it and then craft an identical copy of it via the magic it is attuned with, which means you get to chuck endless versions of this spear at people. But the catch is, once those individual ones are embedded in an enemy, they can be activated to cause a small localized explosion, which can deal a bunch of follow-up damage. And a lot of that spear's runic attacks work off of that mechanic. They'll pump the enemy full of these charges, and then you can detonate it afterwards, or even potentially detonate it at an optimal time as part of that attack to get the maximum effect out of it. And that was really fun to mess around with, and when you include the fact that that is also a necessary item for certain environmental travel, I wound up really enjoying the spear more than the other two weapons, more so than I expected for a weapon you actually don't get until much later in the game. So while I didn't love the shields, I really did love this new weapon. But weapons aren't entirely for show either. Occasionally enemies will throw up like elemental shields that you'll have to knock down with the alternating weapon. So if they throw up a fire shield, you need to use the Leviathan axe to sort of cold your way through it. If they throw up a cold shield, you need to use the Chaos Blades for their flame attacks to get rid of that shield, etc., etc. And that's important because those shields make them basically impervious to any of your other weapons that deal the matching type of damage. But those are the main, I would say, new things to focus on. Beyond that, it's pretty much the same usual stuff you see in a lot of these games. Occasionally, enemies will have some big unblockable attack that you simply have to get out of the way of. Other times, you simply need to dodge out of the way. I will say that hitboxes on some of those dodge attacks can be a little bit wonky, especially like the big frontal AoEs. Like sometimes you'll clearly be out of an attack, but because you're within whatever the hitbox is, obviously you still take that hit, even though visually it doesn't look like anything touched your character. And for me at least, I found saving some attacks that you could use to interrupt those moments were particularly helpful. So when it comes to combat in this game, on one hand, I would say some of that visceral feeling is definitely still there, but other parts of it, some of the subtle tweaks were less than fun for me, especially what they did with the shields, but then things like the spear kind of made up for that and made it really fun. So I don't know that I would call combat, just straight up better than the earlier title here. I would just call it slightly different mostly. Coming up on the end though, let's finally talk about Ragnarok's free DLC mode it got called Valhalla. Now Valhalla is a combat-focused roguelike experience that serves as an epilogue to the main game. And the gist of it is that Kratos goes to Valhalla to participate in a trial of sorts as he contemplates what to do with his future and whether or not he's worthy of it. Now these combat trials are a roguelike mode where we're going to take a whole bunch of permanent progress that we earn over the course of mini runs into any individual run where we'll have a bunch of temporary progress, focusing typically on one of our weapons as well as upgrades to our overall stats and things as we move through it, comprising a bunch of combat challenges as you might imagine. And while the story part of it is honestly pretty good and talks about Kratos' inner turmoil and I would say finally sees him moving forward rather than simply being stuck in the past, but kind of bizarrely and unexpectedly, I would say this combat system and everything they've made here works surprisingly well as a roguelike. Doing things like introducing new enemies and bringing in elements of Kratos' past in the original trilogy and everything. It really is a solid bit of DLC content, and the fact that it's completely free is really cool as well. That, though, brings us to the Steam Deck section, and happy to report here that the game does actually run very well on the Steam Deck. Once you've fired it up at least once, it's also available in offline mode if you'd like to take it elsewhere with you, but obviously it has things like controller support, etc. It is officially verified, which was nice to see. So it looks like they put some real effort into making this playable on that particular platform, which is definitely not unwelcome, albeit a little bit surprising. But seriously, you should be good to go there. But that brings me to my positives and negatives. Now, the positive for me, for starters, just the story and the characters and how they expanded upon them. And while the game does suffer from pacing issues, it doesn't at least lessen the impact a lot of the broader narrative, with this game having plenty of moments that were just punching me right in the feelings. Combine that with the exploration and combat still being solid, enjoyable bits of the experience, and the core of what this game is trying to do is quite good, even if I didn't love every little tweak and change that they made. Which brings me to the negatives. As I mentioned, this game has a huge pacing problem that ultimately makes the game feel bloated and at times a little exhausting when it really shouldn't be. Multiple times throughout my time with this game, I was just really ready for the game to wrap up this plot point that it had beat to death, and that's really unfortunate to me at least because that is not a problem I think the original game had. It was actually a pretty solid overall experience, whereas it does kind of feel like Ragnarok here respects your time a little less. And if I was being hypercritical of the game, I would probably also call out the fact that many of the small tweaks and changes they made to the overall gameplay formula felt trivial at best. meaning that, at least gameplay-wise and everything, it really doesn't move the needle much from that first title. But luckily, I do think the story and everything it does to advance the plot and those characters is worth it, but I do think it's something to be aware of, which leads me to my conclusion for this one. God of War Ragnarok on PC here is $60 US and whatever that is regionally for people. And while if you enjoyed that first game well enough, I think you're likely to get your money's worth out of this one, but there are simply a few things that are worthy of caution, which is things like the PSN requirement, other annoyances on the technical side, tweaks to the gameplay that you may or may not enjoy. And so, speaking for myself at least, having actually paid for this, if you're fine with some of those things I just mentioned, then I think $60 is not unreasonable for this game, and I don't feel bad about having paid that for it or anything. It's just that I think the first game here, or the 2018 version, is the better overall experience that I enjoyed more. So, simply put, it's good, I just don't think it's as good as the first one was, which is as good as a place as any to wrap up this particular video. So, I certainly hope you enjoyed it, found it informative, all that YouTube jazz. I know I was a little behind the ball on this one, truth be told. There was a lot of stuff that released right after this game did on September 19th that was a little more pressing to me at the time, and so I took my sweet time playing through this one. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know down below how you feel about this particular title. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.